So today, we're going to talk about the Mumonkan Case 23, Think Neither Good Nor Evil. This is a little bit of a long reading, and it's sort of a famous story. So, the sixth patriarch. So actually, before we even get into it, because we need to know who is the sixth patriarch. So Zen goes from India to China to Japan to America. And so the first, when Zen comes to China, historically, that is credited to Bodhidharma. And so Bodhidharma is either a real person or a mythological figure, depending on who you ask, but certainly it is the case that the practice of Buddhism progressed from India into Tibet and into China. And so then Bodhidharma's robe and bowl are passed down through his successors until you get to the sixth patriarch, who's known as Ino. So one of the interesting things about Ino is if you get into this story, he was a peasant, and he sort of worked in the stables of the monastery. And there's this other character, monk Myo, who was expected to become the heir of the fifth patriarch when the fifth patriarch died. And there's this poetry competition to determine who has the most insight, and the assumption is that monk Myo will win and receive the Dharma, which includes at the time a robe and a bowl that are Bodhidharma's robe and bowl. They're like symbolic of the transmission of the Dharma. But then this, illiterate peasant who's been hanging out and listening to the Dharma talks around the fringes writes a poem and wins the competition and receives the robe and bowl instead. And it's given in secret at night because of the controversy it's going to cause. And so that's why when you receive Dharma transmission, you receive it in the middle of the night, at least certain parts of it. So this story that I'm about to read you happens right after that. So we join our characters already in progress. The sixth patriarch was once pursued by monk Myo to Dayure. The patriarch, seeing Myo coming, laid the robe and bowl on a stone and said, "This robe symbolizes faith. How can it be fought for by force? I will leave it to you to take it." Myo tried to take up the robe, but it was as movable as a mountain. Myo was terrified and hesitated and said, "I've come for the Dharma, not for the robe." But of course, we know that's not true. He chased him because he wanted the artifacts of transmission. "I beg you, please," but now he's had a little epiphany. "I beg you, please teach me, O lay brother." The sixth patriarch said, "Think neither good nor evil. At such a moment, what is the true self of monk Myo?" At this, Myo was at once enlightened. His whole body was dripping with sweat. With tears, he made a bow and asked, "Besides these secret words and meanings, is there any further significance or not?" The patriarch said, "What I have just told you is not secret. If you will realize your true self, what is secret is not you in you yourself." Myo said, "Although at Obai I followed other monks in training, I did not awaken to my true self. Thanks to your instruction, which is to the point, I am like one who has drunk water and actually experienced himself, whether it is cold or warm. You are really my teacher, lay brother." The patriarch said, "If you are so awakened, both you and I have Obai as our teacher. Live up to your attainment with care." So there's two things I love about that story. First is, think neither good or evil. So I picked this koan because I was poking around today and I was thinking, I kind of wanted to talk about compassion, but then I thought, everyone who does Buddhist things always talks about compassion, but I thought, well, what if we talked about where compassion comes from? Because there's a version of compassion where it's an idea in your mind that you probably should do, right? Like, I should be a good person. I should be nice to people. I'm going to present a version of myself which is warm and kind. And, someone comes to the Zen Center, I'm not going to be like, "What do you want?" Right? I'm going to be like, "Hi, welcome, come in." And I can do that from the heart, or I can fake it, right? And sometimes it's actually skillful to fake it. Maybe we're not feeling it and we need to fake it because we need to help someone. But true compassion arises out of thinking neither good nor evil. It's our natural state. If you see a bird with a broken wing and you're not thinking about it, your natural state is going to be to try to assist the bird. And in the same way, we when the sixth patriarch is saying, think neither good nor evil, what he's saying is, don't get stuck on any spot, right? Don't think, well, this is bad, this is good. I'm going to avoid this and do that. And I've got to always be like this because I want people to see me as this certain way, right? And it's interesting because then our protagonist is drenched in sweat as he's having this epiphany. And I love that because it's a very emotional thing, letting go of, here's a person who imagined himself becoming the successor. He's going to become the sixth patriarch, and then he doesn't. And now he's like, that's not right, I deserve this, right? I mean, that happens all the time in life. I deserve this, I don't deserve that. Well, what happens if you think neither good nor evil? Right? What happens if you don't tell a story about what everyone else is doing and you don't tell a story about what you're doing? Like, you just don't at all. It doesn't mean that you don't see it. It doesn't mean that you aren't appropriate. But we just turn off the machinery of storytelling. Think neither good nor evil. Right? Doesn't mean don't think anything. It just means be with what's right there. Then what happens? That's where compassion comes from. I think everyone in the room right now has a partner of some type, right? So if your partner is irritable, then I can tell a story about it. How dare she speak to me that way? I don't deserve this. I work hard. I shouldn't have to come home and be talked to like that. But here's the fun part. What if we flip it? My partner's never allowed to be irritable with me for the rest of her life. Does that seem reasonable? No? Okay, well then they are. Then they are allowed to be irritable with me. Okay, well then what do I need to do? Well, think neither good nor evil. If we assume that at some point between now, and the end of my life commitment, that I'm going to not be at my best, and I'm going to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, get annoyed at a thing I shouldn't be annoyed about, maybe she'll pay me the same level of compassionate respect. Someone can be like, "Rah," and you can be like, think neither good nor evil. I noticed that you seem pretty upset. Right? And it doesn't have to, it's funny because if you're, in therapists know this, and Zen, if you've lived in Zen centers, you know this too, right? You can say the right thing in a way that it's like, you should really watch your mind. Right? Like if you spend time in Buddhist communities, you'll find that people will weaponize the wise Buddhist sayings in a way that communicates that they don't approve of you. But then you can think neither good nor evil about that too. So what the sixth patriarch is aiming at, I think, is who is the true self if it's not judging by any standards? And the answer to that is the true self then is the self without any fixed characteristics, right? The true self isn't a self. The true self is aligning with what's arising both internally and externally. And then if we reside in the natural state, then the appropriate response will naturally come up. It's funny, I always think about these characters in parables, whether you're in Zen parables or in the Bible or whatever, you have these spiritual stories. I always like to think about what is it like right before the action? This guy's chasing someone into the mountains. What mental state must you be in order for that to make sense? What mountains do we chase our loved ones into? I don't know about you, but been married a long time, I have a daughter, I go to a job, I interact with coworkers, I interact with corporate structures and state regulatory structures, and all of those things are sometimes suboptimal. So how do we think neither good nor evil? At that time, who is your true self? Pro tip I will offer is, when you find yourself thinking good and evil, come back. Especially evil, right? I mean, good fantasies aren't great either, right? We sit around fantasies about how wonderful things will be in the future when this happens. But typically it's not as destructive as, can't believe that, stupid, you know. And we feel it in our body. It's exhausting. It's just exhausting. But that's where compassion comes from. Compassion comes as the natural response to the distress of another if we don't layer anything else over it. It also means that compassion can come for our own distress if we don't layer things over it. If you just notice, like, man, I am on a rampage to beat myself up this morning. Well, now you're thinking evil of yourself. So at the moment at which you don't think good or evil of yourself, because we don't use affirmations in Zen, right? I don't know, I'm gonna really date myself here, but there's a million-year-old Saturday Night Live skit called Deep Thoughts with Stuart Smalley. And it's basically a riff on like these self-help gurus of the 80s and 90s, and he's standing in front of the mirror and he's like, I'm good enough and I'm smart enough and gosh darn it, people like me. And it's hilarious, but it's also exactly right. It's worthless. How can you need to prop up your state? Your current state is perfect and complete, lacking nothing. It doesn't need to be propped up. You return to it. You don't prop it up. It's already there. The poem goes like this. You may describe it, but in vain. Picture it, but to no avail. You can never praise it fully. Stop all your groping and maneuvering. There is nowhere to hide the true self. When the world collapses, it is indestructible. There's nowhere to hide the true self. Even when your world is falling apart, right? When your life is a country song, right? Dog dies and your wife leaves you and your car won't start and your guitar's out of tune, and it is indestructible. That true self, you take it with you everywhere. You can always return to it, no matter how bad it gets. Sit on the cushion and burn up how bad it's gotten until you come back to your core. And then from there, often, new insights and skills and opportunities and choices arise, because all of the stuff that was in the way has fallen out. And now, it's kind of like, like if you go in an old toolbox and like you need a particular kind of screwdriver and there's just all this stuff and like old rusty tools and bolts and old nails and a half can of spray paint, and you start pulling all that stuff out, and then you can see what tool you need. It's kind of the same with people. It's indestructible, and you already have it. How cool. How cool is that? It's like, but my life is hard, but you still have it. But everything sucks, but you still have it. But it's wonderful, okay, but you still have it. Good. Okay, I think that's enough.